Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to walk you through this webinar on governance. These are the 5 points we're going to be talking about. We're going to first talk about I'm going to talk about actually the 3 models of governance, help you figure out which one is the correct one for your organizations. We'll talk about pros and cons. Then I'll discuss content hierarchy. We'll also touch on who administers Tableau Server, basically who is the best person to administer Tableau Server. We're going to slide into content promotion, talk about how to migrate content from one environment into another, and then we'll finish by talking about, I will touch on access, content, and permissions. I will touch on because it is a massive topic. We could easily spend the next 3 hours on content permissions. We don't have that time, so I'll give you some tips and we'll talk about the difference between permissions and roles, and I'll give you some best practice tips, and that will be pretty much it. That'll be our time. So let's talk about the 3 models of governance. Governance can either be, the 3 models can be either centralized, decentralized, or federated. And before I dive into each of these models, let's just take a step back and go over what governance is. It is the management of people, technology, and processes towards a common goal. Within the specific context of Tableau Server, it's the process of configuring, managing, and utilizing Tableau Server from both a system administration, I'm being given the secret code to slow down, so I'm doing that, the system administration and content administration perspective. What this means is the implication is that the governance is supposed to encompass the administration of the system as well as the administration of the content. It is the way the business creates, posts, uploads, publishes, consumes information via Tableau Server. And it's also the set of rights and responsibilities of each user of Tableau Server to support an optimally running collaborative environment. An analogy would be if you just turned 18 and you got your first car, and that's great, and you've got your license, but you also need to learn how to drive a car. And so that's what that last bit is about. Governance is the framework that's going to encompass that and guide the processes around that. Let's talk about the first model of governance, the centralized model. In a centralized model of governance, all configuration, access, and direction is provided by a single person or a single team, a Tableau support team. The end users go directly to the support person for support and for troubleshooting. It is a very simple model to put in place. And it's also the model that's going to sort of organically be implemented if you don't deal with governance. The drawback is that it is the quickest model to bottleneck. As people, as users buy into the new application, as they get more and more savvy, more interested in Tableau Server, they're going to come to the support person or team with questions, support questions, support issues, and whatnot. And at some point, very quickly, the support person is going to get overwhelmed, and it's going to create a bottleneck. And when that happens, support will no longer happen. People will lose interest, will lose faith into the system, and they'll stop buying it. They won't be as interested in the application anymore. So there's reasons to take steps to not let that happen. When you see that your centralized model of governance is no longer sufficient to support your infrastructure and your environment, Tableau Server environment, it's probably time to switch to possibly a decentralized model of governance. In that model, the Tableau support team or person grants access to power users that manage their respective teams or department. So we now promote power users, and these power users will be helping their respective teams within the organization. And it's simple enough. It takes more time to implement than a centralized model, so it takes more work, upfront work. You need more processes around the whole concept to make it work. But it scales much better in a larger organization. The downside of the thing to watch out for, I would say, not a downside, but the thing to watch out for with a decentralized model is that there's really no coordination between the power users. For that, you need the next model we're going to look at, which is the federated model. And so what happens when there is no coordination, or at least I would say no formal coordination between the different power users, is that you're going to have teams that are possibly going to have different requirements, and those might not always play well together. For example, one team, so there's a new feature with Tableau Server, with Tableau that came out recently, which are called extensions. Extensions is the ability to add JavaScript to a dashboard to extend the dashboard's capabilities. It's great, super fun, but it opens a can of worms in terms of security. So this one team decides they don't want to have to deal with that. It's too much exposure, not exposure, but I mean, it exposes too many security holes. We're going to shut it down. They make a really strong case for it. It's an easy case to make. The power user takes that information back to the support person, and they shut down extensions for Tableau. That's great. Now, team two, they really were expecting this new feature. They were waiting for it. They're ready. They need it, but they no longer have access to it because it's been shut down for the organizations. If there had been any consultation, they could have made a really good case for it. And also, they would have probably realized, or somebody would have told somebody else, that extensions can be enabled on a per site basis. It doesn't have to be shut down. It's not an all or nothing situation. And so really consultation and coordination is really important for the example that I was just giving you. And so we're going to slide into the last model of governance, which is federated. In a federated model of governance, representative from each department form a Tableau support committee, and this is when the coordination happens. And this committee has the appropriate visibility across the organization to support Tableau Server and to support each team as they work with Tableau Server. So the idea is that there is a sponsor from the executive management team that ensures the appropriate visibility, and the Tableau support committee provides direction and prioritization for the Tableau support team. This is the model. This is really the end of the road, or I should say not the end of the road, sounds a bit negative. It's the last step of our maturity model, if you will. It's where we all would like to be. In large organization where it's really needed, it takes the most amount of time to implement. There are a lot of processes that have to be built and that people have to buy into. So it takes time. And that's it. That covers our three models of governance: centralized, decentralized, and federated. Let's talk about content hierarchy now. Tableau Server is an environment. Within an environment, we have different objects. Excuse me. Tableau Server can break down into sites. By default, there's always one site, but you can have more than one. Then we have projects. Projects are like directories, or it's like the directories on your computer. This is how you manage your content, basically, how you manage your content. Workbooks are the files that include dashboards, views, and sometimes data sources. Data source can but don't have to be necessarily bundled into a workbook. Let's look at that let's look at it with a bit more perspective. So we have our Tableau Server. By default, it comes pre-built, configured with one site. We can add more sites. And the thing to remember about sites is that they are share nothing environments. I'm going to repeat this a few times during this webinar. Further down, we now have within each site projects, at least one, usually more. And we now are able to have even what's called nested projects, which means that we can have projects within projects to further or organize our content. Our content is made up of workbooks and data sources. The data sources come at the bottom of this little diagram, but they're there. Workbooks will contain dashboards and views or sheets. And those sheets are the basic building block of your visualizations, and they consume data from data sources. And that's how it all plays together. I don't want to show you this right away because it's a little heavy at first. I want to sort of slow walk you through this process. Next question. Who administers Tableau Server? Well, to tell you that, well, to help you figure out the answer to that question, because I can't really provide you the answer, let's go over what it takes, what's involved in administering Tableau Server. So common maintenance tasks include regular monitoring of core processes, users, groups, performance reports. What this means is, let's look at these 4 points one at a time. As far as core processes, well, Tableau Server is made up of components. They all have to be up and running. This needs to be monitored. Users, at the very least, you want to figure out if you have stale users. You know, somebody that hasn't logged into the system for 6 months. You can probably liberate their license seat and assign it to somebody else. Groups, depending on how they are being managed or used. For example, you can synchronize groups in Tableau Server with groups in Active Directory. When you do that, there is a certain amount of maintenance that goes into administering those groups, especially when there's movements within the user base for each of those groups. And by the way, groups, I should mention, for those who don't know, groups are groups of users in Tableau Server. And so when you synchronize your groups in Tableau with your AD groups, there's definitely some maintenance to do there. Even if you don't, if you manage your groups directly to Tableau Server and solely into Tableau Server, there's still sometimes some maintenance to do around that. And then performance reports. That's when we talk about notifications, for example. Tableau Server will send notifications. They're important for server events. For example, we can receive notifications if we have processes in our server that become unavailable, if we're running out of disk space, or even if certain Tableau Server data extracts will get refreshed on schedule. So we need to make sure that those notifications actually do get sent. That's another process to monitor. We have to collect and analyze data about different Tableau processes, especially processes that run in the background without any user interaction. You see, when a process depends on a user interaction, we know when it gets triggered, and the user themselves usually know what to expect at the other end of that. If the expectation isn't met, we know something is usually wrong, and we take that to the Tableau Server admin person, and they can investigate. But when a process doesn't have any user-driven event attached to it, it's a lot less likely it's going to be found out easily. So you need, regular monitoring for that. There's also some fine-tuning. We can adjust tasks and processes to so they can run optimally. And there's some troubleshooting steps that regularly have to take place, where we have to identify bottlenecks, reduce them, reduce workbooks. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to be managed in terms of the processes, and that potentially need to be troubleshot. And this is why we have to monitor and report on performance regularly. A Tableau Server administrator is also going to have to answer general support inquiries. They will have to deal with Tableau Server upgrades, I know I do, and Windows patching, which happens on a schedule. And amongst other things, renew your SSL certificate. So these are some of the tasks that a Tableau Server administrator has to take on. So really, it boils down to this. And this is my personal opinion. You don't have to share it. But it boils down to this. You either want to take a Tableau power user, somebody who knows how to use Tableau Server power user, and promote them to the role of server administrator, in which case you have to teach that person how to manage a server, how to administer a server. Or you can take somebody, you can talk to somebody who already has that basic knowledge of server administration and teach them how to use Tableau Server. That's why this slide comes into place, because we provide those trainings all the time. I help people with this all the time. Training server administrators to work with Tableau Server is something we do regularly, and it's a lot less work than to train somebody on server administration. That's my point, really. So the question is, do you want to train a server admin, or do you want to train a Tableau person, etc.? Content promotion. Well, content promotion, first of all, the reason we're talking about this is because Tableau doesn't have a built-in feature for content promotion. When do you need content promotion? Well, for example, you are developing a dashboard, you are building a data source, you're doing this in a development environment. Once it's all ready for production consumption, you're going to want to migrate that content to production. That could be a different server, or it could be a different site within the server. And for the purpose of this example, I'm going to take an example of migrating the content from one site, from site A to site B. Site A being development to site B being production. And the steps are as follows, very, very simple. See? So I'm joking, of course, you don't have to remember all these steps. This is a blow-by-blow checklist of, that was good, I'm just switching over. It's a blow-by-blow checklist. I don't want to leave this on because it's really off-putting. Those are the actual steps. You will have this list as you get access to this presentation, but the point I'm trying to make is it's a lot simpler than that. So we're going to start by, and this is all done, by the way, in Tableau Desktop. It's all done in Tableau Desktop. So we're going to open up your Tableau Desktop. We're going to sign in to our site A on our server, which is our development site. Then we're going to open a workbook from the server. Then we're going to also open a data source, also from the server. We're going to have all this open in Tableau Desktop. Then we're going to save that content locally on our computer. So we're saving our data source, and then we're saving our package workbook. And that's it, we're done. This is phase A. We have to now close our content. This is really important because we can't log out of site A and log into site B until we have all our content closed. What this means is you can't log in to a site B if you have content from site A open in your Tableau Desktop. So now we're logging out of the development and we're logging into production. We then bring up the saved content, this content we just saved on our computer. We're now bringing it up. I don't have a slide for that. So we're bringing up our data source and we publish it to our production site. And then we bring up our dashboard itself, our package workbook, and we're publishing that to our site B, to our production website, to our production site. Did I say website earlier? I meant site, I apologize. And that's it. That's all it takes. That's why that really long list was really off-putting, is because that's all it takes. You know, this is a blow-by-blow, but it's as simple as what I just described. And that's all it takes to promote content. I think this is our final topic. Let's talk about content permissions. Second to last. Oh, right. Users and groups. I forgot. Thank you. Users and groups. Oh, actually, there was a little mistake in my slide there. Never mind. So we're not talking about users and groups. We're talking about roles and permissions right now. My apologies. Had a little slight creep came in there. So roles and permissions. Roles relate to licenses. Okay, I'm going to come back to the slide in a second. Roles are tied to licenses. Permissions are bound to projects. All the permissions that you apply to your content are project-centric. Roles pertain to your license. In order to log into Tableau Server, in order to consume content, to do anything in Tableau Server, you need to be given access, and to give that access, you need a license. You need to be given a seat. That license can take the form of a viewer license, which has certain capabilities, an explorer license with the ability to publish, or a creator license. And you can see from the little chart is that creators can do more things than viewers. The way roles and permissions overlap is, let's say you are an explorer, you have an explorer license with the ability to publish. You still need, at the project level, the ability, the permission to publish content on a given project. So you can have a publishing role, but if you don't have the publishing permission, it won't work. The reverse is also true. You can be given permissions to publish to a project, but if you have a role that doesn't include publishing, such as an explorer, you won't be able to publish. So that's where roles and permissions overlap. Now, there's really a lot to talk about when we talk about roles and permissions. And as I mentioned before, we could spend hours on this. I don't really have time to get into the nitty-gritty of permission. That being said, I am happy to take this offline. So if you want to contact me to have a lengthier conversation about permission, that is absolutely available. My email address will be the last slide of this presentation. So you're absolutely welcome to contact me or contact us, and we'll be happy to dive into the joys of Tableau Server content permissions. What I will talk about very quickly, very briefly, are functional security models. When Tableau Server gets deployed, by default, we are dealing with a least restrictive model of security. What this means is that we have one project. It's a default project that's created by default. Excuse me, and it's open for all. The way it's configured by default is that everybody has access to all the content therein. There's no content when you, well, actually there are some samples, and everybody has access to it. That's a least restrictive model of security. You might want to choose a most restrictive model of security, which is to say that we're going to lock everything down and we're going to dole out permissions as they are needed. This is usually 9 times out of 10 the model chosen by large organizations, because it's easy to have a free-for-all, so to speak. When you're in a least restrictive environment, we have 15 users, but we have 1,500 users, it's not workable. In a least restrictive environment, we're going to add permissions when we need to restrict certain content. So we're going to restrict content as needed. In a most restrictive model, we're going to dole out permissions as they are needed. That's the main difference. And finally, let's have a quick word about users and groups. When we're managing users, again, this is all done at the project level. All permissions are project-centric in Tableau Server. When we manage users, it's a good idea to not assign users directly to content. It's considered best practice, and this is for the same reason as I was talking about earlier about the number of users we might be managing. If we're managing 15 users, it doesn't matter. But if we're managing 150 or 1,500 users, you really have to think about how you're going to administer that, who you're going to deliver, who's going to have access to what, and it makes your life a lot easier, it makes everybody's life a lot easier to assign users to group and to assign the groups to content, as opposed to assigning your users directly to content. I hope that was clear. It was a pleasure for me to talk about all this.